I want to share with you what I believe is the most important single political governmental phrase of the next decade. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about this over the next few years, and I hope I can convince you that it's as important as I really believe it is. I think the most, well, let me start out and test you. How many of you think you know what 2 + 2 equals? I mean, I know we've had problems with math education, but let's right through with this. Callista and I did a movie called Ronald Reagan, Rendezvous with Destiny. And we interviewed Lech Wałęsa in Gdansk, Poland, and Václav Havel in the Czech Republic, the two great leaders of their countries in the struggle for freedom from the Soviet Union. They both said that the decisive moment was when Pope John Paul II went to Poland in June of 1979, a year and a half before Reagan took office. And in 9 days, he outlined and communicated a vision of religious liberty and a vision of man's relation to God that fundamentally shook the Soviet Empire. And they said from that point on, they were in a constant struggle between the dictatorship and the people. During that 10-year struggle, 10 years, they adopted the slogan, 2 + 2 = 4. It came in part from the novel 1984 by George Orwell, in which the torturer for the state says to the innocent citizen who's being tortured, if the state tells you 2 + 2 = 3, it equals 3. If the state tells you 2 + 2 = 5, it equals 5. And the citizen's thinking, but 2 + 2 = 4. Albert Camus, in his novel The Plague in 1947, wrote, there are times when a man can be killed for saying 2 + 2 = 4, because it threatens the authorities to be told the truth. I believe this single model is the most important insight to begin to get ourselves out of the trouble we're in. And let me give you an American version and see how many of you can come up with the answer. I'm going to give you the first half of an equation. If you can't afford to buy a house, what's the second half? How many of you would agree don't buy the house? I want you to think about this. We spent 20 years lying to ourselves about the possibility of putting people who can't afford a house into a house they can't afford and kidding ourselves about the consequences. And I will tell you flatly, I don't think the political class in Washington has learned one thing from this. The same people who lied to themselves the last 20 years are busy this month lying to themselves, and the only improvement they've added is they now try to write the bills late enough and big enough they don't have to read them. And then they don't have to lie to themselves because they actually don't know anything in it, so they can vote for it in total ignorance. Now that's where we are. But part of the reason we're there is because we have not had a direct enough and candid enough conversation at every level of government. Sacramento's current $25 billion problem is a problem of 2 + 2. You have a capital city dominated by bureaucrats and lobbyists, with politicians unwilling to tell the truth, trying to ram down on the state policies that are so unacceptable that a state which voted 61% for President Obama turned around and in May voted 64% against spending more taxes and more money, so that not a single county voted for the referendum. And in fact, even in San Francisco, there was a majority of fiscal conservatives voting no. Now, when you have a state in bad enough shape that San Francisco begins to have fiscal conservatives, you have a state that has violated 2 + 2 = 4 about as far as you can. In Detroit, and I wrote a book called Real Change, which just came out in paperback, and there's a chapter on Detroit. Detroit's the most tragic example of bad politicians, bad government, bad regulations, bad taxes. And the result is it dropped from 1,800,000 people in 1950 to under 900,000. Half the housing stock is not needed. The price of housing has collapsed. I was out in Lansing speaking to the state senate about 6 weeks ago, and the day before they had sold 2,000 houses for under $10,000 each. Now, this is a man-made disaster because people wouldn't be honest. Today, the Detroit school system, I think the fourth most expensive in the United States, graduates 27% of its entering freshmen on time because no one's willing to add up 2 plus 2 and get to 4. No one's willing to tell the truth about how bad it is, and nobody's willing to defend the children. So you can go through item after item. We're in the middle of a bad economy. I'm going to come back and talk more about that. And we have a proposal to have a massive energy tax increase. We have a proposal to have a massive health tax increase. And we have a proposal next year to automatically raise taxes on every American already written into law. The worst possible policies at a time of economic challenge. And yet, the political machine lumbers onward because it's not about success for the average American, it's about power for the politicians. I think you have to recognize, and I suspect all of you have had this experience, you cannot successfully balance the current budgets by just being cheap. The great challenge in Sacramento is that there has been no model that would enable them to understand how to fundamentally change the government of California. I believe this is one of the most important intellectual challenges we have. And I want to suggest to you a 3-step process. And if this interests you, I'm going to teach a 4-hour short course on this in August at the American Enterprise Institute. And we're also going to offer this as a web program on the internet. And you can sign up for the web part of it at americansolutions.com, and you'll be able to get the course at AEI from their website, where I'm a visiting scholar. But we're going to actually develop a course for elected officials, because I think there are 3 steps, and I think we get them backwards. The first step is to develop the vision of a successful state, city, county, school system, or federal government, or country. But do it at the level of the community. Don't get down yet to the government. Figure out what would success, 10 years from now, if we were wildly successful, what would success be? The second step is to ask, what are the laws which would help us get there? And what are the government structures we absolutely have to have? And notice, I am not advocating an anti-government policy. I'm advocating a policy of lean, effective, limited government as a positive good that has to be thought through and developed and managed in a positive way. So what would the effective laws, and how would we rethink it? I believe if we're serious about competing with China and India over the next 30 years, and we have 2 grandchildren, Maggie, who's 9, and Robert is about to be 8. And I really want them, when they're in their 40s and 50s, to be in the most productive, most successful, and therefore safest country in the world. If that's going to happen, I believe we have to reform litigation, regulation, taxation, education, health, energy, and infrastructure. I don't believe you can possibly get there any other way. So you're going to get up every day, and your constituents are going to get up every day, and you're either going to be for caving in, accepting second-class status, and allowing America to decay, or you're going to be for fundamental reform. Well, you first have to build a popular consensus around the kind of state you want to live in. Then you have to build a popular consensus around the policies that would get you to that state. And only then do you write the budget, so that the budget comes last in the process. Now, I don't say this as a theoretician. I say this as the only Speaker of the House in 70 years to have offered, actually 85 years now, to have offered 4 consecutive balanced budgets. We kept spending at 2.9% a year, and that included the entitlements,